Hi students, welcome to another session. We are talking about film studies. We have completed 3 modules and we are going into the 4th module. So this module is going to be all about psychoanalytical theories, about gender, representation of caste and class and religion in cinema. And we're going to basically look at some of the film philosophies that we can use to understand cinema. So let's begin. This is Unit 1. We're going to look at psychoanalytical film theory. You must have studied about psychoanalytical theories, and I'm hoping that you're familiar with Freud and Lacan. So I'm going to use Freud and Lacan to talk about psychoanalytical film theories. So most of the psychoanalytical film theories are shaped out of some of the fundamental concepts developed by Freud and Lacan. So let's take a look at some of them. I'm not going to elaborate on the psychoanalytical theories because we don't need to study all of them, but I'm presuming that you do know some of them. So let's just look at some of those theories which are absolutely necessary to understand psychoanalytical film theories. So from Freud, what we need to remember is about the differentiation between id, ego and superego. So when you understand a human mind, we need to remember, according to Freud, that a human subjectivity is sort of divided between id, ego and superego. Id being our primordial emotions, mostly very primal requirements, and then the ego, which is mostly about our repressed, it sort of represses what id wants, and then the superego, which is all the structures, the social structures, which tries to keep those emotions at bay. Those 3 dimensions. Now, when id desires something and ego suppresses it, it results in a lot of repressed desires. Now, superego will create the social framework for this kind of a repression. Now, when your desires are repressed, what happens? You sometimes deny them. You're constantly in a state of denial. You don't want to accept them. Sometimes you do a kind of projection. So you might want something, but you might put that on something else. What you require is not accessible, so you try to project that desire on something else. And this kind of repression, as I mentioned, this repressed desires, this repression results in some kind of denial and maybe projection, and that is what causes this projection happens in a certain way. The projection is taking the individual or redirecting the individual towards a displaced source of pleasure. So you may want something, but since that is not available, very primordial need is not available, so then you will project that on something else. So it could be an object, which is what we call fetish. So you start fetishizing over something else. Fetish for gold, fetish for things, objects, fetish for feet, anything. It can be a fetish that happens. So this is what we want for this film, understanding of a film. So this fetish could be about a vision, about looking, which we call scopophilia. That is the pleasure of gaze. So when you have repressed desires, I'm just going back to the theory. So when you are denied certain pleasures, when you are denied certain needs that are very primordial, that is reflected in some kind of a projection, and this projection is a displaced pleasure that you are seeking, and this can be in the form of gaze, looking at something, right? So this has happened because this gaze is a fetish. You want to get the pleasure of a gaze, which we call scopophilia. So I'm going to come back to scopophilia later also, not just in this unit. I will keep speaking about gaze and scopophilia later as well. I hope that is clear to you right now. Moving on. So, the second idea that you might want to remember is that of Lacan. So just keep that in mind, the idea of scopophilia, the idea of gaze. So you wanted something very primordial. It is usually, hunger, the desire to for sexual pleasures, or very primordial requirements, and when that is denied, you are projecting it onto something else, and scopophilia, or the pleasure of the gaze, can be a very significant substitute. Now, moving on to Lacan, to understand the concepts better. Lacan has a very similar kind of, growth of subjectivity, pattern of growth of subjectivity, where he again, instead of id, ego, superego, he talks about three growth phases, being the real, the mirror, and the symbolic order. The real, the mirror stage, and the symbolic order. So what is the real? That is when a child is younger than, is an infant, is not able to speak, has not got the gift of tongue, the gift of language. So it is a very basic level of human mind. It is a state of nature where there is no language. The child is not able to comprehend the world with the help of language. It is a very basic natural state. Now, the second state is very important, which is called the mirror state. And for anybody who's doing a psychoanalytical film criticism, would want to have a good understanding of what a mirror stage is. So what is the mirror stage? The mirror stage is when a child is old enough to look into the mirror and to see an image, the mirror image, to believe that this image is the ideal. Because the child understands its own imperfections, it sees the image as the ideal other. So there is an ideal and an imperfect self. So in this stage, the child is not aware of does not have a sense of self, but sees this as two entities, one the ideal and the other the imperfect. So this is a very important stage to understand cinema. Okay, we will come back to it later. And the third is a very simple one, the symbolic order, where the child has learned language. The child is now in the realm of language and is aware of thoughts, feelings, concepts, and is able to communicate with the help of language. So he or she has learned to use language and is now living in the world of symbols. So let's not go into the concept now, just understand these three basic spaces. Now, coming to the mirror stage and in the concept of cinema, you need to understand that the mirror stage is very significant in the understanding of cinema. So Christian Metz, one of the film critics, he said, the screen is like a mirror, where the self disappears. As you're watching a movie, the self disappears. The spectator becomes entirely the other. So there is a subject position that we need to understand here. So there are a lot of theories around this. As you're watching a movie, what happens in the theater? So we are sitting in the theater, and how does this, I'm trying to explain how this whole mirror idea works, because when you're sitting in the theater, it is dark, there are no lights. The experience, even when you have gone for a movie with 10 other people, the visual, the watching experience happens in a very individualistic manner. You're sitting alone and you're watching, you're looking at the screen, and you're like, you're here now like a child who understands the imperfections and watches the drama unfold on the screen, which is like a mirror image. You see the ideal self there. And this, you sort of start to understand your imperfect self and the ideal mirror self there. So you are now looking at an image that you sort of identify yourself with, but still not identify yourself with, because that is the ideal and you are the imperfect. So Christian Metz actually spoke about this concept very interestingly of the screen as being a mirror. And the darkness of the movie theater, the relative passivity, as I mentioned already, how you sit by yourself, and it is a very individualistic kind of an experience, and you are passive, you're not moving. So this passivity, this relative immobility of the cine subject, the person who's sitting and watching, the audience. So this sort of takes you to another level of experience, and you kind of feel a sense of connection with the image on screen, and you start to sort of believe or to sort of share the emotions and passions of the person standing or in the screen that you see on the screen. So there is a lack of differentiation here then. So this is very significant in the way in which cinema as an ideological product is to be understood. Because when you watch a movie, the level of interaction, the level of connection that you build with the images on screen is so high that the ideology that it tries to sort of put forth also gets across to the audience in a much easier manner. Now, Lacan, as he was talking about, the gaze, he actually talks about how, what it actually means, how significant it is. It is this whole idea of this repression and scopophilia, where you get a sense of pleasure, and this pleasure is something that is of extreme importance in the whole film viewing experience. When we talk about gaze, it's an absent gaze. What is an absent gaze? It is this awareness of being looked at, and the fact that it is an absent look, absent gaze, which means that the gaze is gone when you see someone look. The moment you see someone look, the gaze is gone. And so it becomes an absent gaze. Now, the spectator's look is always preceded or framed by another absent look, which is defined as the gaze. So this gaze is a very important component. And it is this gaze of the other that makes film viewing experience a very pleasurable experience for the spectator. Now, when you look at this gaze, you also have to look at the whole experience of viewing. Not just from the perspective of the gaze, but also from the fact that this is happening with the help of a technology within a theater space. And Baudrillard here uses the theory or explains the theory of apparatus, talks about apparatus. Now, what is this apparatus? He says apparatus is a network which includes the screen, the spectator, and the projector. So there is some technological, exact technological presence, the presence of technology that makes this viewing possible. Now, apparatus is a kind of a simulation apparatus. It is like a dream. It is like the theater experience is like a dream. So there are a lot of similarities that are drawn between the theater experience and the dream. So it says that it's like it's like a lot of striking parallels that you can see between a dream and cinema. It says that it is like you're sleeping in the mother's womb. So in the theater, in the dark movie theater, it is almost very similar, and you are in this position while you're watching the film, and there is relatively complete immobility for the viewer, for the cine subject. You are sitting there almost not moving, watching as a passive sort of subject position. So it is almost like a dream that, and whatever you're watching is like as if you are watching it in a dream. What happens when you're watching in a dream? You are in a numb-like state. You cannot respond. You cannot act. And while you're watching a film in the theater, it is very similar to this experience, and the apparatus sort of puts you in this position of immobility and passivity. So you cannot actually do a lot of things while you're in sleep, while you're dreaming. Sleep actually deactivates a lot of your consciousness or your conscious activities. And similarly, while you are watching a movie also, something very similar to this happens, where you are just gazing and sort of identifying yourself with the mirror ideal image on the screen. And this is one of the reasons why cinema becomes, cinema as, or film as an ideological product becomes so important. It becomes so much easier to convey your ideological messages through a film, viewing experience. So the mental perceptions at this point are very minimal as far as film viewing is concerned, especially in the theater. So the simulation, the simulated experience that cinema gives through the presence of the apparatus also makes it interesting for a film critic as to the impact of cinema on the viewer. As I mentioned about Baudrillard and apparatus theory, even by 1970s, the idea that cinema is ideological was sort of established, and because it is believed to be a representation of reality, when we know that it is really not, because as I've already mentioned, the camera cannot be objective. The camera gives the illusion of reality and not really reality. So it becomes extremely ideological, and the passive viewers cannot really, as I mentioned earlier, the passive viewer who is sitting in the theater almost experiencing something very similar to having a dream, cannot really differentiate between the real and the filmic world. And this makes them susceptible to the ideological positioning that that a particular film has. So Baudrillard says a film goer is in a dream with the, as I mentioned already, the darkened room and somebody else controlling your actions. You are this inactive, very passive consumer or viewer. And therefore, you sort of absorbs and sort of internalizes a lot of things, as I mentioned earlier, about probably identifying yourself with the protagonist, and easily absorbing the ideas that you see in this film. So there are a lot of studies on certain films, like something like Willy Wonka. If you have watched the movie Willy Wonka and the Chocolate Factory, a film that you can actually do a lot of studies from a psychoanalytical perspective, or a film like The Black Swan, again a film capable of being read in very interesting ways. You can actually absorb, you can actually try to understand a lot of films using the lens that psychoanalytical theory gives you. The most interesting dimension is, of course, the whole mirror stage and the apparatus theory and the concept of the gaze, which was later developed especially to understand, to understand films from a feminist perspective. So questions can be asked about how does a film construct the viewing subject. Who is this viewing subject? How does film construct that? Or about like how, especially in this age of OTT platforms and viewing experience being so different from what it was before, how do we try to renegotiate with this idea of apparatus? And how does the technology, the newer technologies, try to simulate this experience of reality using technologies, using new technologies? How do they simulate them? So these are questions that you can probably ask in this context. So this session was all about psychoanalytical film theories. I hope you have understood some of it, at least the concept of gaze, the concept of apparatus theory, and also about scopophilia. Scopophilia and gaze probably together, and apparatus theory. Trying to understand how psychoanalytical theories will help you understand the impact of cinema on the individual, how deep that impact is, and why it is important to study cinema as an ideological product and an ideological practice. So please watch the movies and read the text that I have listed here, and come back for another session. Thank you.